Hello and welcome to the final stage. It's been a long journey for me in particular, maybe not so long for you. As the stage starts, we have this wall of spikes over to our left, and we're going to be using that liberally to attack the enemies. Wolverine's dashing attack creates some massive knockback, which is very useful for this exact purpose. Wolverine's dashing attack is very good for almost every basic enemy, so we're going to be using it for those bug robots as well, but when we get to some of the tougher enemies, we'll have to switch things up a bit. So aside from Wolverine's excellent dashing attack, he has some problems that I'm not a big fan of. He has a really average backward throw. It has some decent distance, but it's nothing to write home about. But his forward throw is absolute garbage. The one where he mule kicks the enemy into the air, you've seen me use it accidentally a few times. It deals the least damage of any move I've seen in this game so far, and it's absolutely useless. It serves no utility that I can see. Wolverine is also absent of a projectile attack. He has a fairly decent short-range special attack called the Tornado Claw and a kind of useless uppercut special move. But neither of those are ideal for this situation right here, especially where we keep accidentally grabbing enemies since we're in the middle of them. So we have two choices. We can either use our dashing attack more, or we can use our ultimate. Unfortunately, I can't make Wolverine's ultimate happen. I have tried many times to trigger his ultimate the same way that you would trigger the other characters. It happens maybe 1 in every 10 attempts. And since if I fail the ultimate, it uses Wolverine's desperation attack, which drains our health, it's a really bad idea to keep trying. So I pretty much just give up on using the ultimate, except I trigger it successfully 1 time in this level. But if we could use his ultimate on command, this would be the ideal place to do it for sure. And I want to clarify, I only have this issue with Wolverine. I haven't had this issue triggering ultimates with any of the other characters. It just doesn't seem to register most of the time, and I have tried using a controller instead of the keyboard and mouse, and that actually makes it harder to pull off. But if you could imagine for this screen, instead of this, you saw Wolverine stampeding forward in a whirlwind of death, that would have been the ideal situation here. But instead we're just going to be using the dashing attack all the time. Normally I would attempt to grab the enemies, but Wolverine's forward throw is useless, and the enemies were too closely knit together for grapples. So there was no way that was going to work out. They would just shoot the hell out of me. I would be stuck in crossfire if I tried to use grapple attacks for most of that screen. And now there are red sky lasers. If we stand still for too long, these red sky lasers will shoot missiles down at us. I don't know where these missiles are coming from, presumably the ceiling. You remember how I mentioned the forklifts? Well, they're back. The forklifts, turns out, are significantly more difficult to deal with if you don't have projectiles and aren't very fast. Wolverine may not have the most health out of the characters, but he does have enough to tank these forklifts, especially since the forklifts don't deal all that much damage. This flamethrower guy, though, he's a pain. Many of the screens in this level will just be me tanking the attacks and using the dashing attack wherever I can. Because although dodging is important, there are many cases in this stage where that's almost an impossibility, especially with Wolverine. And Wolverine's moveset, aside from his ultimate, is so underwhelming that I can't say he's fun to play with. Like, I end up using the dashing attack most of the time, but he does have his upsides. Like I said, he does have a significant amount of health and defense. And another mechanic that you might not expect, but definitely makes sense, is that Wolverine's health very, very slowly refills. Unfortunately, it refills so slowly that trying to refill it in the middle of a fight is it's not going to turn out too good for you. Now right here, this would be an ideal situation again for Wolverine's ultimate, but I'm not going to try and use it, because every time I try it seems to end in absolute failure. This is not the first time I've attempted this stage and tried to use his ultimate move. This may be attempt number 4, if we're being generous. Maybe attempt number 4. And I just could not get his ultimate to work under any circumstance. Alright, we lost our first life. But there are plenty of 1-ups in this level. I think we have 2 more 1-ups that we can get here. There you go, you got to see his ultimate, and that is the only time I successfully trigger it in this stage. Don't get me wrong, this stage is definitely possible without the ultimate, and if we were playing as a character with a better moveset, then we wouldn't be having so much trouble here. So yeah, as I was saying, the forward throw, completely useless. Alright, this next screen seemed a little absurd to me at first. They basically rush at you with all of the weakest enemies. These bug robots and these wolf robots that we haven't seen yet. All tiny, annoying enemies that move fast and are meant to chip away at your health. And this may seem really bad at first, but this is where Wolverine's tanking comes in really handy. Because, while there's not much we can do in this situation, we can take a lot of hits, so we're going to use that to our advantage. Now we just have to deal with these wolf enemies, which, well, they're basically Sonic the Hedgehog. They spin in the air or on the ground, and it's difficult to react to them in time, but we're just going to tank them as we did with everything else so far. We can use our dashing attack on them or interrupt them with our Tornado Claw, which works rather well, but only when we only face down one or two of them at a time, and they usually come in swarms, unfortunately. Right now we're just waiting for our health to refill. The next screen has a bunch of these ice robots, which you may be familiar with. Now, the funny thing about these ice robots is that Wolverine is so short that the ice beam actually shoots over his head if you're standing still sometimes. Not all the time though, so you shouldn't rely on that. It's not a foolproof strategy. You already know how to deal with the ice robots, we just shouldn't be standing directly in front of them, but when there's 4 of them, that's a bit harder to accomplish. And Wolverine's moveset, as was already discussed, is rather underwhelming. This would be yet another excellent place to use the ultimate attack. There are a ton of enemies that are hopping around, difficult to avoid properly, but they all hop in the same general direction. Perfect to hit all at once with our ultimate attack, if only we could do that. I'm not going to assume this is an issue with the game, or anything like that, because I have a lack of evidence to prove that, but I do have sufficient evidence to prove that I can't activate his ultimate consistently. Not in this video, but in my previous attempts. And again, we could still easily do this without an ultimate if we had a different character. It would still be frustrating, but it would be easier. During that fight, we gained enough points to get our lost life back, and I'm going to be standing here a while we wait for our health to refill. And while we're waiting here, it's worth saying this is one of the most fun traditional beat-em-ups I've ever played. And this final stage isn't all that bad, it's just that I chose the worst character for it. And on top of that, we can't use his ultimate, but I like a good challenge. Some characters overall are definitely easier to play with than others, and you could probably easily beat the game if you just ran through it as Hulk or Red Hulk, especially Red Hulk, but, you know, all of the characters play so differently that it's fun to play with nearly all of them. I'm not having a great time playing with Wolverine, but he's a good tank, as I already mentioned. And his Tornado Claw is satisfying to use on a group of enemies, but it's hard to get adequate room to do that in this level where the enemies swarm you all the time, you know? Plus that forward throw is just so bad. There's dynamite dropping from the ceiling, but it still gives me way more time to react than Thor's lightning did. Alright, so you may remember the Hydra Golems, and I chose Wolverine for this stage because he has a special animation for them. Yep, there you go. That's why I chose Wolverine for this stage. Are you happy now? Are you happy you got to see that? Unfortunately, these guys move really fast, and they're exactly as difficult as they were when we fought them with Quicksilver, who was the fastest character, which means they are fairly challenging, especially for Wolverine. And it's very difficult to interrupt their charge attacks with Wolverine. I suppose you could say they're a more difficult version of the Ice Bots because they hop around, but their hops are a lot more accurate, and their charges are absolutely devastating. At least the Ice Beam from the Ice Robots didn't damage you. Well, gee, thank you, Captain America, you sure did help out a lot. When you summon Cap for help, why can't he just use his ultimate instead? That would be a lot better. And if you're wondering why I don't just grab them all the... You know, that was ideal. That was the ideal way to get out of this scenario. Alright, the Stone Guardians are back, and I actually find them to be kind of fun to fight with Wolverine. So, just as I said before, we want to spend as little time attacking them as possible because they can't be knocked over, which means they can counterattack immediately. The time they're most vulnerable is after they're done flailing their arms. Right after they're finished with that animation, we want to attack them really quickly and then run away before they either flail their arms again or use their eye lasers. And yeah, you know, that's kind of fun. Attacking them really quickly and then dodging out of the way just in time is a fun experience. And Wolverine is just the right speed to make it satisfying. It's probably my favorite part of the level, honestly. Those eye lasers trip me up a bunch, but that's because I should be jumping when they use them instead of trying to run. We still want to run away, but we want to jump first. But yeah, they're not that bad. I just still wasn't used to fighting them after fighting them with Beast's robot, but they're kind of fun. And then I stood here some more and waited for our health to refill a little bit. Alright, we're finally on the last screen of the level, and we've got a lot of reticles and laser sights pointed at us. We want to get out of the way of those as soon as possible, but it's a little difficult with all these enemies ganging up on us. After we're done being assaulted by off-screen weaponry, though, we'll start knocking the enemies into the spike wall as we did previously. It is worth noting that Wolverine's Tornado Claw makes an excellent counterattack after he stands up because it does activate quickly. It's just difficult to use before you get knocked down because you do need to stand in front of the enemy to use it. This is the final boss, the Militant, and he's not nearly as difficult to fight as Bowman, and his attacks aren't nearly as ridiculous. But with all these enemies on screen and without an ultimate attack, he's still going to be a little difficult. Obviously, our first priority is to get rid of the regular enemies, which shouldn't take too long. All this clusterfuckery happening on screen may make the game look absolutely impossible. But honestly, this is where Wolverine shines, is in his ability to tank attacks so thoroughly. Because this screen was absolutely crammed with enemies and hazards for a second there, but we survived. In spite of us not having an ultimate, there are plenty of ways we can hurt the Militant. We can use our charging attack, which doesn't deal too much damage, but it can knock him into the spike wall. We can use our throw, which does deal decent damage and also can knock him into the spike wall. We can use our Tornado Claw, or perhaps the most effective, our basic attack. Unlike Bowman and fake Thor, there are plenty of times where Militant is open to attack. We just don't want to stand in front of him for too long, but if we can manage to get in close, we can use our basic attack to break through his shield. That's where the money is. You want to get into a situation where he's actively trying to block your attacks, because that's when he's the most vulnerable. So while this boss definitely would have been more fun if I could use Wolverine's ultimate, it's not bad without it. I still do think the bosses may have a little bit too much health, but you know, it was fun. I had a fun time doing this. And I did manage to conquer my internal goal of beating the game without using a continue. We've used a few lives, sure, but not a continue. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a total victory. So that was Avengers United Battle Force, and honestly, Data East should be honored that someone took their pretty okay beat-em-up and turned it into something this spectacular. I love Captain America and the Avengers, but this is just so far above and beyond anything the design back then could have hoped to accomplish. And most of the downsides in this game are the fault of overambition. But I wouldn't discount the game for those faults if they seem too much for you, because there are still changes being made to the game. For example, that thing with Quicksilver, where you could refill a special meter, definitely a bug. That's been fixed. Bowman has been significantly nerfed from when I fought him, and there are still many more changes being made, I'm sure. So if something in this game looks a little too difficult for you, or seems a little too unfair, first of all, it's not nearly as unfair as old beat-em-ups were, but secondly, it might be changed. Make sure you give the guy feedback. But this is certainly one of the most fun traditional beat-em-ups I've ever played. It puts most other fan projects to shame, and I never would have even tried this if the guy didn't directly recommend it to me, so thank you for that, Douglas. But yeah, if you're a fan of traditional beat-em-ups in any sense, you should at least give this a go, and if it's still too much even after the changes, there are cheats, or you could always play as Red Hulk. Thank you everyone for sticking with me on this long journey. It's a long journey for me. It's probably under an hour for you, maybe about an hour, maybe a little bit over an hour. It was longer for me. See you around.